My name is John Callahan of Wethersfield, Connecticut. We have come here today, April 26, 2022, to present a small bit, a taste, a glimpse of the American Civil War in Connecticut. And flags have always been a symbol of patriotism, one that we instinctively protect. Our forefathers recognized the need to follow the colors as far back as the American Revolution. Now, during the Civil War, each Connecticut regiment carried two flags. The American flag, the national colors, you'll see behind me, and a regimental flag, blue in color for Connecticut. Connecticut did not carry a federal regiment color. It was one of the few states that did not, as they believed that they were fighting for all men, but not just the federal government. They did not want to be federal soldiers. They wanted to be Connecticut troops, and so they were. Soldiers learned to focus on their flags in battle. And it was one of the reasons that they were carried, because they were so large that you could see them through the smoke and the noise of battle. And their flag was flying. And where it was flying, there was always hope. There was always hope to win. And it was sometimes that hope actually won the battle. Connecticut first battle flags were purchased from Frederick Rice of Hartford in 1861. They consisted of an eagle landing on a federal shield, and both these clearly symbolized support for the federal government. Because, again, Connecticut troops did not want to be federal troops. And that was always a sticking point. However, it became a norm as the war went along. In July of 1862, the state of Connecticut received approval from the federal government to order national flags from them. Other than that, they were purchased from Mr. Rice. But not all flags were ordered from the government. Some of the Connecticut flags were ordered by patriotic groups who raised funds to purchase the flags from Tiffany and Company of New York City. Some of these flags, like the one you see behind me, which is all silk, hand-painted. Some of the flags that were made by Tiffany were embroidered, and some were hand-painted. And they were very, very expensive. Now, these flags were all presented in a grand affair. The receiving of the regiment, normally by the wife or daughter of a dignitary, would present the colors to the colonel. The colonel, in turn, would present the colors to the color bearer. The colonel would then give a talk or a speech while the regiment stood to attention. And the regimental colonel then gave a speech regarding honor, trust, and care of the gift that would be carried into battle. The flag you see here before you is a reproduction of a Connecticut national color. It is real silk, hand-painted eagle in the canton. The canton is the blue part of the flag, and when displayed like this, the canton is always to your left. The flag is 6 feet on the hoist, that's up and down, and 6.5 feet on the fly, that would be left to right. Now, this particular flag survived the 125th anniversary of the American Civil War for 4 years. Many of these flags, including this one, were damaged not only by shot and shell on a reenactment battlefield, but by sulfur smoke on that battlefield. And I think it's important right now to note, and some of you may even have known her, a special thanks and mention must be given to Geraldine Kaufman, who was very instrumental in the preservation, restoration, and saving of the original Connecticut battle flags. Geraldine passed away several years ago, and this very flag attended her internment. It wasn't planned, but I felt that it was the proper thing to do for everything she had done to preserve the flags. So I brought this flag, pretty much in the condition it's in right now, and planted it about 30 yards shy of the gravesite. The family didn't know I was doing this. I wore the complete Civil War uniform and stood to the colors next to it. The procession came up the hill. The coffin was removed from the car. And many people were looking. It was a beautiful day. It was gorgeous. The sky was blue. And a gentle breeze was blowing, which put this flag out, waving. And it was a proper and fitting end and salute to Geraldine. Afterwards, quite a number of people came over and asked about the flag and why I was there. And of course, most knew that her involvement with the original flags. So today, the old Connecticut flags of the Civil War, which had originally been stored in the State Arsenal building off of North Main Street. Arsenal Street, off of North Main, Arsenal School. And now their final resting place in the Hall of Flags in the Connecticut State Capitol. And it's there to hang an everlasting testimony of the sacrifice and courage of those who carried them. The parade itself, on the 17th of September, 1879, started at Bushnell Park, went up High Street into Maine, where the color bearers of the original flags were already assembled, holding the flag that they had carried during the Civil War. And as the regiments went by, each flag bearer stepped out to his own regiment, turned and led the regiment down Main Street, past the old State House, all the way down to the South Green, Retreat Avenue up to Washington Street, and then right straight down to the Capitol, where they were received by the governor. And as the flags were brought into the new Hall of Flags and placed in the cabinets that were made for them, I think there was hardly a dry eye among all these veterans, for it would be the last time that these flags would be put away. And they say that it was so quiet that at the end of the ceremony, you could hear, sort of like that, those cabinets there. That it was so quiet in that marble hall as the flag sat. You could hear the door close, and you could hear the click of the lock. April 12, 1861, when the guns of the Confederate Charleston Battery opened fire on Fort Sumter, the first gun to fire was manned by students of the Citadel, the military academy in Charleston, South Carolina. The order to fire was given by General P.T.G. Beauregard from Louisiana, who was in charge of Confederate troops at the battery in Charleston. The fort did not return fire for almost 24 hours. While Confederate shells burst the walls and the innards of the fort, Major Anderson did not want to fire back. For one, he felt that this would start the war. He also felt that he was firing at American soil. Finally, after the 24 hours were up, and Major Anderson really had no more ammunition, or barely any, to fire, when surrendered, Major Anderson requested permission from this newly formed Confederate government to fire a salute to the fort and those who had fought so well. It was granted, and during the firing of this salute was roughly the 6th or 7th gun. These are siege guns, very big. The first gun fired, and the second gun fired, and the third gun fired, and the fourth gun fired, and the fifth gun fired, and the sixth gun fired, and when it came to the seventh gun, you had bang! The gun exploded. One member of the gun crew was killed. He was the only Union soldier to die during the Battle of Fort Sumter. Back in Connecticut, young men from all over the state rushed to the colors to enlist, for they were anxious to give that newly formed president of the Confederacy, Jeff Davis, 2 black eyes and a kick in the pants. Unfortunately, down south, the young men down there felt the same way, rushing to the colors. For they all wanted to take part in the grand battle that was to come, so they could go home and tell stories like their fathers, their grandfathers had told them of the Mexican War. Stories of Chapultepec and how they went to fight and how they came home to grand parades. Well, that's what these young people wanted. They wanted to go down to the South and give these traitors the two, come home as heroes. Soon these same young men, of both sides, would be thrown into battle at a place called Bull Run. Now, run is a word they use down south. It's a creek. So Bull Run was the name of the battle if you were from the north. The same battle would be called by Southerners the Battle of Manassas or Manassas Junction. You see, the northern armies named their battles after natural landmarks, such as a run, Bull Run. Southern armies named their battles after man-made structures. Manassas Junction. Junction was a railway which brought supplies from the Shenandoah Valley breadbasket of the Confederacy, all the way to Virginia, supplies and food. So their battle was the Battle of Manassas Junction, or the Battle of Manassas, versus the Battle of Bull Run. They also named their battles, Southerners, after states. So you had the Army of Tennessee, and you had, in the Union side, because they named their battles after major rivers, the Tennessee River, which was kind of confusing in those days because you had the battle, you had the Army of Tennessee and the Army of the Tennessee. One Union, one Confederate. Union armies, Army of the James, Army of the Potomac, all named after major rivers. Back in Connecticut, 3 regiments of infantry were being formed. All 3 had enlisted for only 90 days, as this war was not expected to last really more than one battle. It was an exciting time, loaded with a festive mood, and by many, the same mood as being held down south. To die on the battlefield. Glory, glory, hallelujah. The great sacrifice. And now, it would only be a matter of time before these two clashed in battle. I'd like to ask a couple questions here. How many here, because we want this to be a little more interactive, could tell me something about, could you name, anybody here, name one Civil War site in Hartford? A Civil War site.
Down here on Main and Pratt.
Yeah.
Main and Pratt Street.
Pratt Street,
Yeah.
named after?
I'm not sure who it's named after.
Okay, General, I'm not sure. I think I knew him. I know before, and you're right, because a lot of the streets, Seymour, a lot of them are named after generals. Okay, in fact, since we're talking about streets, we have Berry Square in Hartford. Okay, we have Maple Avenue and Campfield Avenue.
And you have North Main.
Did you read my script? Campfield Avenue really is not Campfield Avenue. It really originally was the old Campfield Road. And the reason it was called that is because down that road, that avenue today, was where Union troops that enlisted in Hartford camped. So it's the old Campfield Road. Later, we changed it to Campfield Avenue. On that same square, Berry Square, there's a statue. A statue of Griffin Alexander Stedman, class of 1858, Trinity College. He graduated, he went south, he really went to Philadelphia, and became a lawyer. In 1861, when the war started, he came back to enlist. Well, he came back and he wound up being commissioned because he went to see William Buckingham, the war governor of Connecticut at the time. And Colonel Sam Colt told Buckingham, I will form a regiment of 1,000 men. And not only will I form a regiment of 1,000 men, I will also provide them with rifles. That's 1,000 rifles. Now, I don't know what the cost of a rifle was in 1861, but 1,000 of them was a good chunk of money. And of course, Buckingham, Governor Buckingham, said, fine. And we, in turn, will commission you, Sam, a colonel. That's where Sam Colt gets Colonel Sam Colt. So he says, the regiment that I will form will be called the 1st Regiment of Revolving Rifles of Connecticut. What a marketing. The 1st Regiment of Revolving Rifles of Connecticut. And so they formed. The thing that the men were talking about was how come if we're forming a regiment, Colonel Colt is never around? Well, Colonel Colt really had no intentions of going south with them. And he put a man named Orris Ferry in charge, Colonel, regular U.S. Army. And he did the training for Colt's 1st Regiment of Revolving. You know it.
Isn't that when they started to do the factory over at Colt's factory, after they started building over by Mel Avenue next to Arsenal School?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, the factory was there long before. He actually had a factory in Paterson, New Jersey, which was funded by his uncle, who gave him a loan to start a factory in Paterson. He developed a revolving pistol, or perfected it, which was called a Paterson Colt, okay, in about 1859, 58. And his uncle gave him the money to do the factory. Well, the Paterson Colt didn't work out very well. And it wasn't a grand seller. Today, a good collectible piece, but it was not a good pistol. The only thing that really remains of that is the money that his uncle loaned him. He never paid his uncle back. So, uncle wasn't happy with that. But he had the factory, yes, in Hartford, right off of Route 91. And there's, you know, when you go into streets and buildings, there can be so much. Like, we think of Colt and we think of pistols, okay? Colt was quite the businessman. He not only refined precision machining, which is what he really should be known for, but he also had, in that same factory or next to it, a furniture factory. Because he bought the land where the factory is very cheap. And the reason he bought it very cheap was because every spring, all that area was flooded. Everything that today we know as Colt Park was flooded. Nobody wanted the land. So he bought the land underwater. He bought the land, and then he built the dike. And how did he hold the dike in place? Willow trees. And when the willow trees grew, and you had the roots going, he harvested the roots and had them made into the twisted willow furniture. So he also was selling that. You know, he wanted to have his revolvers engraved, and some of the best engravers in the world were in Germany. So he went to Germany and asked these people if they would come and work for him. Well, they said no, because we live here, and we're not going to leave our families. He said, bring your family. And he built a whole German village. And if you go down by Colts today, you can see some of the old buildings by Warrani Avenue still have all the markings of German buildings. Yeah. So he did an awful lot. He was the first one to do parental ownership of a building. He built his own buildings behind the Colt building. There's quite a number of them that his employees lived at. They also could buy against their salary from the Colt store. They also had the Colt band. They also had big festive weekends in the summer with picnics and stuff. If you were late getting to work at 7 o'clock in the morning at Colt, the door locked, and you couldn't get in until noon. So he was quite the disciplinarian as well. But he also really was good to his people. So when the war started, Colt's 1st Regiment of Revolving Rifles of Connecticut were ready to leave. Only Sam Colt partially reneged on his promise to provide 1,000 rifles. And instead of 1,000 rifles, he said, I'll give 200 rifles. And I'll give 200 rifles, it's 100 and 100, to the flanking companies. Now you have to understand how a regiment marches. A regiment in the Civil War is 10 companies, 100 men to a company, 1,000 men to a regiment. As they would march in column, they would have a flanking company to the left and the right. These were called rifle companies. And he was going to give his new revolving rifle to these two companies only, which could be understood. It's a lot of money. However, Company C, arriving in Hartford, said, wait a minute, we should have the new revolving rifles, not Company B. Why? Because Company B, although they got here before us, they did not have 100 men. They only had about 60 guys. We came here with 100 men. Therefore, we are a full company, and we should really be designated Company B. And therefore, we should have the rifles. And that went on for quite a while, until finally, everybody kind of threw their hands up, and they wound up with no rifles. Of course, Colt had an excuse for that, because in January the 9th, he died, and kind of ended that argument. But that's really where Elizabeth Colt takes over. So you see how, just from the one question about Pratt Street, has the tentacles that go out in so many different directions. Okay. When I said before about Griffin Alexander Stedman at Berry Square, there's a statue in Berry Square of a man standing, officer, Union officer. And in this hand he has binoculars. This hand he has his sword resting like this. Because he was a graduate of Trinity, and he was voted by Connecticut regiments as being the most outstanding soldier of all of them, they honored him by having the statue made of him. And that's what in Berry Square today. That is Griffin Alexander Stedman, class of 1858, Trinity College. Okay. He is buried at Cedar Hill Cemetery, right over by Colt. And Colt is also buried there. I've always thought, and I've been up there quite a number of times, that where Colt is buried, and it's actually the second time he was buried, he's on the highest point of a hill in Cedar Hill. Sam would have liked that. He was buried originally at the entrance of Colts Park. So if you're going down Wethersfield Avenue and you look on the right, if you're headed towards into Hartford, and you look on the right at where the entrance is, you'll see this big black granite wall, sort of a horseshoe shape. And in front of it, there's a statue of a young man sitting, legs are crossed, and he's got something in his hands. That statue is Sam Colt. When he was a young man, about 16, 17 years old, he went to Europe on the ship called the Corval. And while on board ship, he started getting an idea about making how a revolver would work. And what he's working on in that statue is supposed to be a wooden model of his perfected Colt revolver. Later, he was exhumed by Elizabeth and the daughter, his daughter was there too, and taken to Cedar Hill and reburied at Cedar Hill, 1876, when they opened Cedar Hill Cemetery. It was the place to be. But if you're in a hurry to get to a cemetery. So he was buried there, right maybe 50 yards from General Griffin Alexander Stedman, who died in 1865 at the Battle of Petersburg. By getting up on a redoubt and telling his men to cease fire, and when he got up there, a sniper shot him and killed him. So he lived all the way through the war, but he has a history that we'll talk about at another program. He started off in Colt's Regiment, he went to the 5th Connecticut and the 11th Connecticut and so on and so forth. But yeah, we have a grand history all around us. July 21, 1861, Bull Run, Virginia. For the first time, the great armies clashed upon the battlefield. The Union Army had been taking this battle as a joke, yet found out that fighting the Army of the South, the Army of Virginia, was certainly no joke. As I had said before, it would have been one grand battle and go home. 21, 22. The fields of Manassas became a very sad place where U.S. Marines and U.S. soldiers would be tested in battle, most for the first time. It was a place where legends were made and death would find a home. Confederate General Bernard B., when pushed back by Union troops on Henry House Hill, shouted to his men, "Rally behind the Virginians. There stands Stonewall." Well, there stands Jackson, standing like a stone wall. And so, the legend of Stonewall Jackson and the Stonewall Brigade was born. The Stonewall Brigade, through the American Civil War, never broke, collapsed, and ran for the rear, except once. It has to do with Connecticut, and again, in the future we'll talk about that. Of course, no one ever really knew what General B had meant when he said, "There stands Jackson like a stone wall." For shortly after that, General B was shot, fell dead on the field. So nobody could actually later ask him what you meant by that. Some say he might have meant that Jackson was just standing there like a stone wall doing nothing and not coming to our help. So he told his men to go behind the Virginians, basically, and hide. but from it came the name Stonewall Jackson. July 21, 1861, Bull Run, Virginia. 1st Connecticut Volunteer Infantry, a 90-day regiment, just before the Battle of Bull Run. Captain Joseph Barnum was asked by one of the members of his company, who wanted him to take his watch and what money he had and convey it to his sister in Hartford, stating that he was sure that he was going to be killed during the battle. Captain Barnum declined to receive the trust, stating that he was in as much danger as anyone else and also liable to be shot and killed. During the start of the battle, actually about an hour after this conversation, the man was struck by a minie ball, but escaped injury. As the missive of death lodged in the very watch that he had been trying to get Captain Barnum to keep for him. That watch today is in a private collection, but it still does exist. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Connecticut proved their courage at the Battle of Bull Run when, as the Union forces were falling back towards the stone bridge, it was the gallant boys from Connecticut who protected the rear of the Union forces. As the Union armies went into rout and started streaming towards a bottleneck of a bridge at the bottom of a hill, very big hill. It was the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Connecticut that stopped, reformed their line, and held the Confederate troops back. A gallant but costly event. Courage was shown at every level, and as the 2nd Connecticut Volunteer Infantry held their line, even their regimental mascot, a small but feisty little dog, a little black dog, named Old Blue, ran forward from their line into the Confederate line and bit a Confederate officer, and then ran back, much to the cheering of the Connecticut boys in blue. And Old Blue became a hero. It's funny, but with American troops have a penchant for collecting mascots. The Michigan unit during the American Civil War had an eagle, American eagle, that one of the fellows during the enlistment period had brought with him to the camp. It was on a tee or like this. And so sat the eagle. Well, the company of the regiment liked the eagle so much they renamed it Old Abe. And Old Abe actually went into battle with this regiment. And they found out that the first time that they were in battle, they didn't want the eagle to get shot, so they released him. And the eagle took off and flew and circled the battlefield. And at the end of the battle, the eagle actually came back. And so it did for several other battles. It lived all the way through the war. After the war, 2-3 years later, the eagle was being kept at a GAR, Grand Army of the Republic Hall, down in the basement. And it was well taken care of. During the winter of 1870, a man cleaning out the basement, janitor, left the window open in January. The eagle caught pneumonia and died. A sad ending to the mascot. Well, the three Connecticut regiments were some of the last to withdraw from that terrible battlefield, and then returned home to Connecticut, as their 90-day enlistments had now expired. And just as a side note, quite a number of those fellows re-enlisted in other regiments and fought for 3 to 4 years. But we should never forget the courage of those boys that day and those days that would follow for the next 4 years. And those that fell that day, should and must still be remembered, as time is meaningless in the realm of death. And Old Blue, who charged the whole Confederate line alone at Bull Run, also gave his life that day, along with others, to protect those boys that he had loved so much.
A week before the Battle of Bull
Catholic
Run,
school.
Sullivan Ballou, a major in the 2nd Rhode Island Volunteers, wrote home to his wife in Smithfield. July the 14th, 1861, Washington, D.C. Dear Sarah, the indications are very strong that we shall move in a few days, perhaps tomorrow. And lest I should not be able to write you again, I feel impelled to write a few lines that may fall under your eye when I am no more. I have no misgivings about or lack of confidence in the cause in which I am engaged, and my courage does not halt or falter. I know how American civilization now leans upon the triumph of the government, and how great a debt we owe to those who went before us through the blood and suffering of the Revolution. And I am willing, perfectly willing, to lay down all my joys in this life to help maintain this government and to pay that debt. Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence can break. And yet my love of country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me irresistibly with all those chains to the battlefield. The memory of all the blissful moments I have enjoyed with you come crowding over me, and I feel most deeply grateful to God and you that I've enjoyed them for so long. And how hard it is for me to give them up and burn to ashes the hopes of future years, when, God willing, we might still have lived and loved together and see our boys grown up to honorable manhood around us. If I do not return, my dear Sarah, never forget how much I loved you, nor that when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, it will whisper your name. Forgive my many faults and the many pains I have caused you. How thoughtless, how foolish I have sometimes been. But oh, Sarah, if the dead can come back to this earth and flit unseen around those they love, I shall always be with you in the brightest day and the darkest night. Always. Always. And when the soft breeze fans your cheek, it shall be my breath, or the cool air, your throbbing temple. It shall be my spirit passing by. Sarah, do not mourn me dead. Think I am gone, and wait for me, for we shall meet again.
Sullivan Ballou was killed a week later at the First Battle of Bull Run.
Thank you. Thank you. We tried to dance right out of here, but her husband was watching. Yeah. We talked earlier about Civil War sites, and Elizabeth Colt. Elizabeth Colt really was the one who was instrumental in rebuilding the Colt factory in 1862. Okay, so if it wasn't for Elizabeth, a lot of this history would be gone. A couple of things about the marketing with Sam Colt was prior to the war, or prior to the battle of First Bull Run, prior to Fort Sumter, but they knew it was all going to happen. Sumter was already under siege, and they said, no guns, no weapons will be sent to the South, because we were, big gun manufacturer up here. No guns will be sent. There were boxes from Colt that were being sent, and they grabbed the boxes anyways. They told Colt that you can't send these south. He had already sent 2 matched revolvers to each governor of the southern state to show them what beautiful work they did. He said, but those are not guns. Those are machine parts that we're sending south. And they said, well, the boxes are marked machine parts, but they're full of guns. So he had to take them all back. There were so many things with Sam, and then of course he did meet his demise, in 1862, just after the turn of the year. But Elizabeth really was the one who was instrumental in getting everything going. The state capitol, the Hall of Flags. I don't know, have anybody been there? Have you been to the? I know Diane has. Well, of course I know you. I was with you. You been there? No. That is an amazing place to see. It is unbelievable. Marble hall, a big statue of Buckingham sits in the center, and around it, in these cases, glass cases, are the battle flags of all these different Connecticut regiments. It is unbelievable. Even the flag, probably the one that was the hardest to get because it was in pieces, was the 16th Connecticut that had enlisted a little bit later in 1862. And at Plymouth, North Carolina, they were captured, the whole regiment. And the colors were captured too. But before the colors were captured, the standard bearer took the flag and tore it all up. It's a white flag. Tore it all up. And he passed out the pieces. And these pieces were held by Connecticut soldiers through the next 2 and 3 years of imprisonment in Andersonville, in Georgia. And when they came back to Connecticut, they actually surrendered these pieces back to the state, and the state, as best as could be done, rebuilt the flag. So the determination of these soldiers, young men, was amazing in itself. We've talked about Campfield Avenue and Pratt Street. Does anybody else have any questions or something they would like to ask about the Civil War? We had talked earlier, before people came in, about doing a program a little bit different, getting away from the Civil War, although based on a Civil War hero, George Custer, and talk about the Little Bighorn, which is an amazing story. But if anybody has a question that they would certainly.
Samuel Colt, how old was he when he passed away?
When he passed away, I'm not sure exact age, but he's in his mid-50s. Yeah, he wasn't an old fellow, like us.
And that was right after the first of the year.
right after the first year. Yeah. And I had done a program, Diane, my wife, had done a program at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in the late 80s. We went down. I did mine first. And then about a week or 2 weeks later, she did a program at the Athenaeum. And when we went down the first time, we stopped. There was maybe 20 of us, all in period clothing. And we went down and we stopped at the Episcopalian church that Elizabeth Colt built. And because we were in proper clothing, costume of the period, the pastor was like stunned, and he said, "Would you people come in and take part in the church service?" Sure. It's the first time that hoops had been in the church in a long time. And yeah, I wasn't wearing one. But he brought everybody in, and then he came over to me and said, "Well, you run the," yes, and he says, "Would you come up and give a talk about Elizabeth and Sam?" Well, it's hard to say no at that point, And it turned out that it was the anniversary of the death of his daughter. And nobody realized it in the church, even the pastor. And so when I brought that up later, he said to me, we should have known that as well. And, but it was great. And then we went over to the Athenaeum. And I did not know at that time that how much of an event it was going to be. The people that take care of the staff, they came up to me and said, "Well, we're going to have you standing over here because we need room for the people that are coming on by tour buses." And I'm thinking, like, tour buses? So I'm getting my head together about doing Griffin Alexander Stedman of Colt's Regiment. He's now a captain. And I'm standing next to this makeup of the dome of the Colt building. It's all metal. So I'm standing next to that, and I'm trying to get my head together. And one fellow comes up and he goes, "Excuse me, are you doing Griffin Alexander Stedman?" And I really wanted to say no. But I said, now we're talking maybe 3 minutes before and trust me, Athenaeum staff does not go 1 second beyond the start time. They're in the back going, and there's not a lot of flexibility there. So, "Are you doing Griffin Alexander Stedman?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, now this was the first time I ever did it. He goes, "The whole front row here," which was pretty big, "are all direct descendants of him. And they all came here to see you." And I'm thinking like, oh good, no pressure there. No, just kick my stress level up. So we started the program on time. And a young woman, she works at the Smithsonian today, Catherine Hurwich, in a beautiful outfit, came, one of Diane's girls. Diane had her own unit, all women, and women and children. And she came by, and her intro to this was, she stops and she looks, she goes, "Oh, Captain Stedman, I did not realize you were home. I have a newspaper, and so I'm reading the newspaper. She goes, "Oh, Captain Stedman, I did not realize you were home. I thought you were fighting with your regiment in Virginia." And I says, "Well, Catherine, I'm home on leave, and I came home for the funeral, was 19th of January. So it was like 10 days later, it worked out perfectly." I said, because he died on the 9th. I said, "I came home for the funeral of my good friend, Sam Colt." And she goes, "I did not know that you knew Colonel Colt." And then my reply, my segue into the story was, well, how well did anyone know Sam? And then I go on, and I had characters come up. It was kind of like one of those You Are There, remember that show? It used to be on TV years ago. And characters come up, including one was the uncle who lent him the money for the Paterson, New Jersey factory. And Richie was really good. He comes up and he talks to him, and he talks to the crowd. And he's all dressed, derby, and comes up and he talks to the crowd, and he says, and I was the one who lent my nephew, Sam, the money for the factory. And he gives a little story of that. And then he turns to walk away, and he stops, and he goes, they never paid me back. Which became a kind of a laugh. And then, but Diane's girls were coming up and talking about fiancés and husbands that they had lost during the war. So, it was really a very, very touching, very. And then Diane, 2 weeks later, came back with morning practices of Victorian Connecticut on Elizabeth Cole. And because she had gone through so much tragedy. Her son died, Caldwell. He was kind of a wild young man. He was good at, I said this before to you guys, that he really was good at spending the family fortune. He was excellent at that. He loved yachts, racing boats. He was killed in Florida. That somebody hit him on the head, so they say, and he went over the back of the boat. It was the end of him. He loved yachts, he loved spending money, and he loved married women. And so they think that there was some connection there, that he took a drink. And but she lost so much. She lost 2 daughters, she lost her husband, she lost her son. And she still continued. But an amazing woman. She lived in what's today called, I don't know if it was called that then, but I believe it was, Armsmere. It's on the end of Wethersfield Avenue. If you're going into Hartford, and you look to the right after the entrance to Colts Park, you see a long building. It has 2 lions out in front of it.
That's where the women live at.
Armsmere. And it was built afterwards. That's where the family lived. But after the war, and after everything was said and done, the building was given as a place, a retreat for Episcopalian, widows of Episcopalian pastors. Yeah. So it became a home for widows.
She knows quite a bit about the history of Hartford.
So it was amazing. But Diane did her story with her girls, and her girls were absolutely gorgeous. They started with the different stages of mourning. A woman would go into mourning for up to 2 years after her husband passed, up to 2 years. And it started off with a full mourning, and as it went along, you could see the progression back into society. A man who lost his wife also had to, by society, had to go back into mourning for 6 months.
Those guys.
Yeah.
They get short.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a difference there. And but her girls were great. They came up in the full mourning. That was when little Lisa came up, and she had the full outfit on. I mean, the heavy black veil, the hat, whole thing. And you couldn't even see her. She looked like a shadow, gorgeous. She came up, and she gave a talk about her husband, new husband. She'd only been married 2 weeks. John, who was killed at the Battle of First Bull Run. And she gave a little talk about that and how it happened and how she felt. And then as she put the veil down, she started to turn away. And she looked back at the crowd and she said, I still love him though. Not a dry eye in the crowd. And it was, a lot of it was just, impromptu. So you knew what you knew what you were going to be called on. You knew what the subject was. You knew but a lot of it was just, yeah. And but her girls did a great job. One girl, Heather Waslewski, who really was the star of one of Diane's shows for getting dressed. She's a very pretty girl, blonde hair, beautiful girl. They would have her come out in just her underpinnings, which I was never allowed to go to. I couldn't understand. Not you. You're on guard duty. You're 3 miles from here. And but they would have Diane would have her come out in the underpinnings, and then they would demonstrate all the layers of clothing that these women had to go through and put on to get dressed. But she had on the pantalettes,
Yeah.
and the whatever that goes underneath the bodice,
You're
or
not
whatever.
good at describing
And
this.
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to know those names. And but she would have that on. The thing that was, although there was many spectators that were interested in that, especially the women, she had one of the biggest collection of these young reenactment soldiers watching this demonstration.
Sure.
And today she's married with 3 children. And and it's funny because some of these young people that we've worked with in the past, today you see them and they're married and they've got kids that are grown. It's time passes.
It certainly does.
Time passes. One of our sons, adopted sons, was
He's just talking,
welcomed into West Point
Oh.
and graduated West Point and then wound up in the Army for 25 years.
Career out
And then, he is now retired. He's retired as a lieutenant colonel.
there.
And, but so many of them. And I remember David when he was just a...
Little
But
baby.
she used to bring West Point cadets to our house because if they're plebes, freshmen,
Yeah,
they can't have a car.
no.
Can't have a car until they're like a senior or something. So they would hook rides with guys that were headed for like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, have them dropped off in Hartford, where we were living at the time. Dropped off, and Diane would treat them, maybe 5 or 6 of them,
At your home.
and let them, they could lay on the couch, watch TV, eat pizza, all the things that West Point would like
That was
never
a
hear of.
special treat.
Yeah, so it was great. They would come and they, but it's just a lot of stuff that you do remember,
Yeah.
and
Those are good years.
yeah. My background, and Diane's too, is we are in a number of movies and videos. We're in the movie Glory and the movie Gettysburg. We're actually in Gettysburg. I portray a captain of Confederate infantry, Alabama infantry, on Pickett's Charge, and on the Fight for Little Round Top. So we got to talk with Ron Maxwell, the director, I did, and because they don't know who you are really, but they know what your rank is. So I had walked back from the wall when we were doing the Pickett's Charge over the wall, and I had walked back, and he comes over to me, he's the director, comes over, he goes, "Excuse me, Captain." He goes, "But every time you've walked back," which was, we shot that 12 times, like the 3rd time back, 4th time back. He goes, "But every time you've come back, you're walking back like this." He says, "You're seeing something that's wrong, something I'm not seeing?" I said, "Well, sir, let me explain it like this." And I am a Vietnam veteran, so I kind of know what crossing a rice paddy is, and that's just a field. That's like a rice paddy without the water, Like that, huh? You like that press screen, huh? I'm watching you. But anyways, he says, I said, you're talking about these guys coming up to this wall through cannon fire, solid shot, canister, double canister, when they were 25, 30 yards out. Now, if you don't know what canister is a shell that loads into the cannon mouth, the muzzle, pushed down, and it's a wood block. First it's a powder bag, then a wood block, and then a net. And in this net has about anywhere around, they vary, but 20, 25 iron balls, about the size of golf balls.
Wow.
And so when they fire the cannon, This explosion goes and pushes the wood, and this thing, it comes out like a giant shotgun, except the ball is that big. So that goes out. Now what they were doing when the Confederates were close to the wall was they were loading double canister. So I shoved this down the barrel, right, regular way, but the next shot, I knocked the powder bag off and just pushed. So now I got double the load in there. When the Confederates were coming within 35 or so yards, they started firing double canister. And they fire by, after it's loaded, they put a, what they call a friction match in the touch hole of the cannon. It's not a fuse. It looks like a cotter pin, okay? Put it down, you have a spike, which punctures the bag of powder. Pull it out, it just drops, it hangs on the lanyard. And then you put this friction match in the hole, and it has a little hook and a little lanyard. And the gunner steps away from the gun, turns his back like this, like that's gonna help. And when he's watching the gun commander goes like this, he pulls it, boom, the gun goes.
So that was the second one after the first one?
No, together,
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
boom. You know, roughly 40, 50, 60, 80 balls flying out at once. They said that from the area where Robert E. Lee was watching this, from the Confederate line still, you could not see the wall anymore. There was so much smoke, white smoke from the battle. And when they fired the canister and double canister, all you could see through the smoke was a yellow flash, flash, flash. And when they did, because it's solid smoke, flash, flash, all you would see was flags going in the air and pieces of people flying.
Oh,
Yeah,
Shredded.
it just, that's why you have, if you go to the major battlefields like Gettysburg, then you'll see so many killed, so many wounded, so many missing. Not that they ran away. There was nothing left of them.
pieces of
That's right.
They just disintegrated, you know. Yeah, they just were no more. Cushing's battery, he's buried at West Point today. Cushing's second U.S. battery at the wall had 3 guns. All 3 guns had been disabled, except for one was cocked, the wheel was broken. He went up to his colonel and said, "Sir," and the colonel later said, "I expected him to say, you're going to request permission to withdraw." Instead, he wanted to move his guns forward. The colonel just looked at him, and he said that he couldn't, give that kind of permission. He just looked at him. Cushing went forward. Cushing had been shot in the shoulder deep enough that it blew his shoulder strap right off, which meant probably the better part of his joint was gone. And the other piece of shrapnel had hit him in the groin. And when he went up to the colonel, he was holding the groin, blood streaming through his fingers, blood coming down, and asked to move his guns forward.
oh my God.
And the gun was moved forward. What impromptu crew came up, they loaded the gun, and Cushing went to the gun, took the lanyard, pulled it, boom, Confederates gone, Confederates back, so many of them. Confederate ran up and shot him with a pistol in the mouth. Bullet went through his head. He fell dead on the trace, which is the back piece of the gun. Fell dead over there.
Wow.
Alonzo Cushing, Cushing's battery at Gettysburg.
Yes, I remember.
So, I mean, there's so many, so many stories and things that happened, but.
So John, why were you shaking your head then? Why were you shaking your head at the, when the
During the
director
movie.
asked you, why were you,
It's
what do you
doing
see?
everything.
Oh, when I was walking away,
Yeah.
and I was shaking my head going like this.
No. We used to.
Yeah, you were saying, what the hell?
Okay, no, when I was walking away and I was shaking my head, and Ron Maxwell came up to me, and he said, "Captain," he says, "why are you when you walk away, why are you doing this?" And I says, "Well, I've been to Vietnam, I've seen, people, I've seen the unpleasantries of war, and I've never seen men march like tin soldiers right into this firing, people exploding, literally people exploding. I says, when people go forward like that, they're really going forward like this. It's almost like this. I said, why do they, you read the book, I said, and they refer to it as the storm, going forward into the storm. It's because the bullets and shrapnel is coming so fast that you're even hiding behind this, anything. That's the way they should be going forward. There was one story at Gettysburg, one guy, he was so afraid to go forward, his captain went up to him and said, then take this, and gave him a tin plate, said, hold this in front of you when you're good. He did, and he lived. But the point was, and he goes, he thinks about it. He gets up on the big bullhorn, standing on the wall. He goes, the next time we shoot this scene, I want all the Confederates coming forward. I want you to go as if you're going into the storm. And I'm thinking, like, am I going to get my name in the credits for this? Should I get some kind of recognition for that? I read the book, and but we are in a number of videos and movies. We were honored at first Bull Run because there was a lot of spectators at Bull Run. On the original Bull Run.
Oh my gosh.
In 1861. And Diane and I were there. She had a fine light blue and little flowers outfit and a bonnet with a funnel-like front straw.
It's really pretty.
And the pinks and blues on the dress, beautiful dress, 120-inch hem on the skirts. And you see, you think I don't pay attention to you.
I guess.
This is years ago. I still remember what you were wearing.
See that?
And can I get any points for this? Anyway, but I was wearing a full weight suit, cotton, and a straw top hat.
We just bought this.
And the people, to get into being one of the spectators watching the battle on the hill from Washington, which way they came, you had to be, put your name in the lottery. And then if you were picked by the lottery, you had to be inspected. And if you met their standards, which was like 100%, everything from shoes to hat, then you could be, and they only took so many. We were there, we just at the fence watching, dressed. They came over to us and they said, could you just stay here a minute? And I'm thinking like, Diane, you didn't steal anything, did you? Because if she did, we'll put it back.
How did these spectators end up being killed during the battle?
And the spectators, they're never really,
Got close enough?
no, they didn't record that. However, there were a number that I know would be or had to have been injured because a couple of the carriages, in fact, actually several, were turned over. And you don't fly out of a carriage wearing a 120-inch hem,
Yeah, right.
without getting hurt or bounce, unless you fill your skirt with helium.
Float over.
But yeah, there probably were a number that were injured. I do not know of any that were killed, or as they would have said, killed. But
They thought it was a
So
picnic.
people actually knew when there was going to be,
oh yeah, it was all sort of prearranged. They kind of knew the armies were there. They were waiting. Everybody was like, actually, General.
so people whose land was taken by the armies or whatever, they moved people out. Would those people stay or?
Well, you had the fort down at the bottom of the hill, and then on the hill itself was the hill was called Henry House Hill because that's where the brick building was, Henry House, and that's where the armies really fought.
Oh, okay.
But they were already pre-positioned, waiting for each other.
Waiting, oh,
Yeah, like two
okay.
fighters
All right.
waiting in the corner.
So it was
Yeah.
ready, set, go? And?
Pretty much. The way that Connecticut troops traveled, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, was on the far side. If we use this table as Bull Run, that's basically the way it goes. And then over here would be Henry House Hill. Jackson would have been over there. B would have been over there. The Marines would have been over there. And what I did when I went there, I was alone. I made the mistake of saying to somebody, You know, when somebody comes up and say, hey, would you do me a favor? And you go, oh yeah, sure. But no, you have to learn to ask, what is it? You know, because about 3 months later, this woman came up to me, and she says, my husband and I are moving to Alexandria, Virginia. And you said that you would help us move.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, and we're renting a truck and we need you to drive. Blah, 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 blah. So I kept my word. We went down there. It was a nightmare of a trip. As we entered the Baltimore tunnel, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tire blew out in the truck.
Oh.
And luckily, had it been 30 seconds later, we would have blocked the whole tunnel. Okay. But we were outside of it. And anyways, we got to a place, I unloaded. I never carried so many boxes of books. Books are heavy.
Oh, yeah.
Carried them into the house, into the house, and the next day, we were going to have a day together, and then the following day, they were going to ship me home.
So we're talking reenactment now, is this?
This is real.
This is real.
Oh,
This is real, not a reenactment.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the guy, the fellow says to me, he goes, well, John, he says, we're going to send you home by train. You know, then I would get picked up at the railroad station. And he goes, but what do you want to do tomorrow? I said, well, I don't want to be insulting to anyone. However, what I really would like to do is I really would like to spend a day alone because I want to go down to the Manassas battlefield, Bull Run. And I want to go and do my own little thing down there. So I have a little backpack I brought with me. And when I did, I mean, they were fine with that because I don't think they liked me anyway. But so the next day, we stopped at a place. I bought a little sandwich, a little lunch thing, my backpack, and off I go. They let me off at Henry House Hill, so I can look all around, see where Stonewall Jackson was, and General B and the Marines, and so on and so forth. I go down the hill. There's another house down there, a stone house, and then you take a right, kind of on an angle, go up an embankment, and then it goes into the woods. Okay, so now you're here, and you're starting along where the Bull Run is. Okay. This here is, it's really heavy foliage, really trees and, you know, and I'm going along that, and a lot of it is just cliff. And I'm wondering why did they cross it? Now I know, because it's like this, you know, it's like 30, 40 feet down, you know, no way you could cross there. And so I'm walking along, and as I got to about here, I was making a turn. I ran into I was getting lost. There were a couple trails that went off, and I was getting kind of lost, and a woman came by on horseback. And I asked her, you know, and she said, oh, no, you have to go down this, and when you go to the right, you'll see a small cemetery, a little path cemetery on the right. And then just beyond that, you'll, maybe a quarter mile, you'll come to a clearing. Cross the clearing, and she explained. So I'm, okay. So I take my turn down the path. I'm going down the path. Never saw the cemetery. Never saw it. But there was like a hole in the brush and the trees. There was like a little clearing in there with a bench, a Park Service bench, you know, wood, flat. So I went in there, a good place to eat my lunch, right? So I sat down. And I started eating. And all of a sudden, I got like the creepiest feeling. Now I'm not one to get like nervous in the dark, and I've been places in my life that you just don't do that, you know.
Somebody was watching you.
That's what I felt like. Like, why do I feel like I'm not alone here? You know? And in fact, I didn't even finish the lunch. I kind of repacked it, and I went out. And when I went out back to the main, which was like a logging road, I actually found myself walking a little faster and faster. It was almost like something was with me.
Yeah.
You know. Then when I got out to the sunlight, everything was fine. Went across the sunlight, back into the trails, back down to this end where the Connecticut troops had entered Bull Run, and got to the stone bridge, called it perfectly. I was supposed to meet my friends at like 3 o'clock, and I'm looking at, you know, and I said, oh, geez, it's like 5 to 3, you know. I got a way to go. And all of a sudden I saw them. So it was like perfect. But they were led, the brigade commander was William Tecumseh Sherman, later of Marching Through Georgia fame. So, but at that time, he was a brigadier general, leading a brigadier brigade, okay, 1 star. And, but it was an interesting time, and it was an interesting walk, especially to do it alone, you know. But I did it reverse. They would have come this way, and I went that way, you know, so that was really the only difference.
It seems to me I recall that Dwight Eisenhower's house was right there near.
Dwight Eisenhower was there during the battle.
No, he had a house in retirement, right?
He, no, it's down. His house is down by the. If you went from like Little Round Top here, and his house is kind of out that way from it. There's a covered bridge over a small creek, and that's where his house is. Over there. I couldn't tell you the name of the street, but I would be able to find it if I, you know. Yeah, it's.
I remember that.
Yeah, there's quite a Gettysburg, and I had said this before you guys came in, that if you were going to ever go to Gettysburg, any battlefield really, but in particular Gettysburg, because it is 26 square miles of battlefield, 26 square miles. And how did they communicate back and forth other than by riders? Give a dispatch and they ride. Usually they used to give 2 and 3 dispatches because they figured maybe 1 or 2 of them wouldn't get through.
Right.
You know, so they'd have the same dispatch on 3 different riders.
So were there other people who would intercept and try to get whatever messages they were
Oh
sending
yeah,
through?
oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. You know, there's a rider. He's wearing gray. There's an empty horse.
Yeah.
The infantry used to always say about the cavalry when they would say, "Oh, it's the cavalry." Well, yeah, I like the cavalry, but I ain't never seen a dead one. You know, it's like, because the cavalry always skirted the battles. That's what their eyes and ears were. They were to logistically bring back reports of where the enemy was moving or what they were doing. So when they say the eyes and ears of the army was the cavalry, that's what they meant. You know, they could go out there and figure out what everybody's doing, you know.
So,
Well, thank you very much.
you're right next door, I can always go over there and hear all this, right?
Middle
Except
of the
that I
night.
could be there all day long.
Maybe for a while. Yeah, I'd like to thank you all for coming.
I hope you come again.
You can pay on the way out.
That's the hat.
Or we moved the price down to $25 a person.
Are we coming back in?
I like doing the stories, I like doing the
I believe we're coming back in June.
Oh, you're coming back in?
memories, you know, of these people that lived. And what I had said in here was that they should always be remembered because there is no time limit in death.
That's true.
You know, what they did, although it be 1860, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is the same as if it was today. You know, they gave up what we all, I guess, consider the most precious thing we have, their life. You know, anything else and everything else can be replaced. You know, but, so it's, and it goes with any war. And it goes with any people and things, and even Old Blue, the dog, little mascot. You imagine that? That little sucker ran up and bit a Confederate officer and ran back.
So when in June are you coming?
John?